You know that feeling you've probably had lately that the world just seems a lot more unstable? Well, it turns out it's not just you. That sense of unease isn't just driven by headlines. It's actually backed by some pretty alarming data that shows we've stepped into a new, and let's be honest, a much more turbulent chapter in our history. And that feeling of instability, it is absolutely backed by hard data. Just look at this number. Right now, there are 59 active, state-based armed conflicts happening across the globe. That's the highest number we've seen since the end of World War II. We're talking Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa. The geographic spread of violence is growing.
And the human cost behind these numbers is just staggering. In the last 2 years alone, more than 152,000 people have been killed in these wars. And these aren't just statistics on a page. It's a brutal reminder of just how intense and lethal these conflicts have become.
It's this exact reality that has led many European leaders to start using this really chilling phrase that we have entered a pre-war era. What they're saying is the old stable order is basically gone, and military conflict is no longer some distant possibility, but a present reality that we have to prepare for. So, what does this pre-war era actually mean for us? What are the new forces driving all of this? What's the real cost? And how in the world do we navigate it all? All right, let's dive in. Okay, so this brings us to the big question, right? The one that's probably on your mind. With all this conflict, are we just watching the prelude to a third world war? Well, even though the parallels to the past can be pretty frightening, the general consensus among defense and international relations experts is no. And that but is a really big deal. What we're facing today isn't a simple repeat of 1939. It's something different, and honestly, in many ways, it's a lot more complex. So if it's not World War III, what is it? Well, experts are calling it a fragmented systemic conflict. Think of it less like one single massive world war and more like a whole web of interconnected proxy wars and regional fires. They're all being fueled by the competition between the great powers, but they're also carefully managed to avoid that direct, catastrophic confrontation between them.
And one of the biggest drivers of this new era of conflict is the rise of a new strategic bloc, one that's actively working to disrupt the current world order.
Now, this axis of upheaval is really important to understand. This is not a formal military alliance like NATO, where they have a binding defense treaty. Nope. It's a much more flexible, informal partnership of convenience between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. And what unites them is one common goal: to weaken the US and its allies. So how do they actually do it? Well, their playbook is pretty clever. They work together to get around sanctions, they share military resources. I mean, we see this with Iranian drones and North Korean shells being used in Ukraine, and they coordinate on military technology. But the big strategy here is to stretch their rivals' resources thin by creating and fueling crises in lots of different places all at the same time. Okay, so when you hear the word Axis, your mind probably jumps straight to the 1930s, right? But are we really just reliving history? Well, when you take a closer look, you find some really crucial differences. This is where things get really fascinating. Back in the 1930s, global trade basically collapsed. Today, even with all the tariffs and trade wars, it's surprisingly resilient, just shifting towards friendshoring with allied countries. Alliances back then were super rigid and binding. Now they're much more flexible and focused on specific issues. And of course, the technology is a complete game changer, with things like nuclear deterrence and AI totally rewriting the rules of war. And that shift in alliances is really key. So as these big global institutions like the United Nations get stuck in gridlock because of great power rivalries, what we're seeing is the rise of minilateralism. Think of it like this. Instead of trying to get the whole world to agree on something, small, nimble groups of countries that trust each other, like the Quad, are getting together to act quickly on specific issues, whether that's maritime security or building new supply chains. They're just bypassing the global gridlock. And a huge piece of this puzzle is the United States' own changing strategy. I mean, this quote from official U.S. documents says it all. The U.S. is basically signaling that it's not going to be the world's sole security guarantor anymore. It's moving to a more selective engagement. And what that does is create a power vacuum, and it forces allies, especially in Europe, to step up in a big way and fast. Now, these huge geopolitical shifts aren't just abstract ideas for diplomats and generals. They have very real, very tangible costs that affect every single one of us, and they're leading to a classic and pretty painful economic problem. I mean, the
The sheer scale of this is mind-boggling. We are officially in a new global arms race. Global defense spending is hitting a record $2.63 trillion. And in a pretty historic move, NATO countries are now aiming to spend a massive 5% of their entire GDP on defense and security by 2035.
And this brings us right to that classic guns versus butter trade-off. It's a brutal calculation. Every single dollar, euro, or pound spent on new tanks and missile defense systems is a dollar that can't be spent on things like healthcare, education, climate change initiatives, or social programs. This forces governments to make some incredibly difficult choices about what they value most. And to see just how quickly a regional conflict can become a global crisis, just look at this case study of a hypothetical war with Iran. It shows a devastating chain reaction. It starts, and Iran retaliates by closing the Strait of Hormuz, the world's energy choke point. Oil prices immediately double. Then the crisis spreads. The region's fertilizer exports, which are 30% of the world's supply, get cut off. And just like that, you have a global food crisis. Suddenly, a war in the Middle East means higher food prices for you, for me, for everyone, everywhere.
So, what's the bottom line here? As we head further into this decade, it's clear we have to learn to navigate a world that's playing by a completely new set of rules. So let's recap the key takeaways from all this.
Okay, first, this isn't World War III. We're in a persistent, lower level, but still deeply destructive state of fragmented systemic conflict. Second, the old world order is gone. We're now in a polycentric world with multiple centers of power and these shifting, flexible alliances. And third, the economy has fundamentally changed. The push for security and resilient supply chains is now more important than pure efficiency, and that's locking in higher inflation for the long haul.
And this leaves us with one final, critical question. The entire logic for how nations and businesses operate has shifted. It's moved from maximizing growth and profit to maximizing security and resilience. It is a profound change that is going to define the next decade. The real question is, are we truly ready for it?